Hello traders, welcome to Price Action Insights free members area. My name is Chris, and we decided to do a series of videos on both price action and some general trading videos as well. The series is going to be an ongoing series, and there's really a lot about price action that I want to share with you. We're first going to take a look at some of the underlying drivers of price delivery and price action and help you to gain a deeper understanding of what price is doing on your desktop, as there are virtually countless aspects of price behavior that can be applied to your trading. I think that you'll find that our depth of understanding of market structure and price behavior is fairly thorough, and a lot of it comes from, of course, our extensive research that I did in the early and mid 2000s, as well as the extensive experience that I have through trading through a number of the investment banks, and what I've learned through the FX desks, and with access to some of the deeper level technology applications. So it's important to understand that the price behaviors that we cover can potentially be adapted to however it is that you trade. In the free area, we're not going to offer subject matter that is intended to be a strategy per se. It's very important that the comprehension of the concepts and market structure really need to be put into a process and thoroughly understood, and there is a specific process that you really should use to understand the price behaviors more deeply. But we're just going to start out here with the basics, and I hope you find some value in the content, and let's get started. I find it interesting that a lot of traders in the retail market, they kind of want to learn from the top down, which is the really the complete reverse of how you should be learning how to trade. You really need to build a foundation and then build up and refine your processes and refine your understanding of market structure and the specifics from there. It's very important. Also understand that you only need your niche in the market that blends your psychological profile to that of market structure, and just finding your corner of the market where you extract money from the market. But you've got to engage in the process. It's absolutely critical. Learning from the top down and copying somebody else's trades is just not going to work, because there's too many blind spots, too many holes, and you're just going to end up losing. So we're going to start out today with liquidity basics. And we're going to just start with let's just take a bank as an example. You've got your investment bank, where that deals in very large volumes of FX flows, and they have their internal prices. So the investment bank is going to have a virtual endless multitude of client profiles that are dealing in foreign exchange. The bank makes an enormous amount of money in fees in doing foreign exchange transactions. So a large amount of the revenues come from foreign exchange fees, because virtually every business entity and even personal entity has demand for foreign exchange, has foreign exchange interests at some level. So the investment bank would have private clients, investment funds, corporations, central banks, other speculative entities, and it's virtually endless as well. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the liquidity providers. Now, the investment bank is also going to have a multitude of profiles of how they're dealing with each individual type of client. So if you're just a private client, for example, and you want to send $100,000, do a wire transfer into another currency or to another country, they're going to have a certain charge for you, and the spread is potentially quite wide. And then they can effectively choose your spread based on your level of knowledge, how much you challenge them, and how you negotiate with the bank for that spread. So the bank's going to use their liquidity, maybe offset the liquidity with a counterparty or internally, and make the transaction. And every single independent entity is going to have a different agreement with the bank in terms of accessing their liquidity and the costs of their liquidity. So when the bank deals internally, although they are quoting interbank prices, they can effectively spread it as wide as they choose, or as wide as the client would tolerate. So inside the investment bank, of course, there's a foreign exchange desk, and the foreign exchange desk will deal with all of these entities quite uniquely. So for example, some entities may have a very high demand for various structures, different types of instruments offered by the bank, and different structured instruments by the bank that may actually be uniquely made for the client. So for example, if I'm a corporation, I may have an interest in hedging my purchases or sales of goods or services. If I am a private client and I have a view on what direction one currency might take over another, I can go to the bank and I can ask them to structure a product for me. It may be an accumulator, an accrual. There may be dual currency investment options involved, and any combination of that, including spot contracts, or spot positions, or forward, or even just swapping cash. The investment bank so if a certain party wants to make a transaction through the bank, they have an agreement just with the bank. The bank will provide the liquidity. They will either provide the liquidity to the entity and their request, and they can either provide the liquidity internally, or they can offset the request or the transaction with a counterparty within the bank. And so when they offset the transaction with a counterparty within the bank, they're of course just going to simply match the prices, and then they're going to have separate agreements and take a fee or a portion of the spread from one party and the other. The bank also has the option, if the bank is providing liquidity to liquidity providers. A liquidity provider is an aggregator engine that will provide liquidity to, for example, your retail broker. If there's demand, if there's an agreement by which the liquidity provider can offset trades against liquidity from in the bank directly with the client, then it can sometimes get a little bit tricky in terms of the provision for the liquidity provided, and there may be a scenario where we have a last look scenarios or systems or technology in place that the bank will use as a protective measure so that they don't get clicked or arbitraged by the liquidity coming in from liquidity providers. It can also apply, of course, depending on the nature of a number of the other entities accessing the bank for liquidity. It's called last look. We'll cover that in a separate session. But these liquidity providers, if they're accessing liquidity in the bank, sometimes the liquidity and the bulk of liquidity flowing into the liquidity provider can vary quite widely. And the impact of that I can discuss in another session as well. But a single quote from the bank at a specific time when the market is in an unstable environment can influence a movement of price quite materially, and we're going to study some of that as we move forward with some of the videos. So this gives you just a bit of a general idea as to what goes on inside one independent bank. I will probably get into more detail in some of our later videos, but I just wanted to, because I didn't want to throw too much at you for those of you who are in the earlier stages of learning, and just want to give you a basic framework. So the way the interbank flows can work. Now in consideration for you and your, I'm assuming that you are a retail trader, and your retail FX platform sitting in front of you on your desktop or laptop at home or wherever you are. I just want to give you a kind of a sense as to where prices are coming from and what you're seeing on your laptop. And actually, we're going to, of course, get into a lot more detail on that. But it's important to the source of what's providing the price delivery to your desktop. So here you have a collection of investment banks, tier 1, tier 2 banks that are very rich in liquidity, and they all have a multitude of clients and liquidity coming in from all sides in very large volumes. So the investment banks, of course, they have separate agreements with the client, which I had just discussed. And the clients can be funds, private clients, institutions, corporations, central banks, liquidity resellers, sovereign funds. Really, again, it's important to understand that the foreign exchange marketplace is virtually endless. It's not a bunch of speculators sitting at their desktop or sitting in their office managing funds. There's just an enormous demand for foreign exchange transactions, and that needs to be understood in terms of the understanding the wealth of liquidity. And when we get into understanding that volatility is a function of available liquidity, then it's important to understand the range of sources and not just look at it through a narrow set of glasses and think that it's all that every participant has an interest similar to that of your own, because they don't. It only represents a very fraction of the marketplace. So an investment bank, the collection of investment banks are going to have an agreement with a liquidity aggregator, okay, the likes of Curenex, Hotspot, FXall, and the aggregator is going to have agreements with a multitude of banks. So they are going to set up lines of credit with the bank. So we used to have, well, we still do have prime brokerage, which is a bit of an old-fashioned style, where you set up an account with one investment bank, and through that one investment bank, you establish credit, you have collateral, you establish credit with all of the other banks, then you can get prices from all the other banks, and you have it through technology. You have a means by which you can access each of the independent prices, and you can either aggregate them or choose them independently depending upon the deal you want to make. But it's changing. The marketplace is changing quite a lot, and so if you've got a liquidity aggregator or a reseller of liquidity, what they're doing is they're taking the prices, they're aggregating the volume of prices, and then they are either offering it up to clients directly, they're offering it up to a client who may be an individual client. The client may be what is now called prime of prime. So in other words, rather than setting up your own independent prime brokerage with a bank, you now have prime of prime, which is you just need to set up with one entity, and it's kind of a one-stop shop, where it's for high volume, really much larger institutional, much larger volume traders. You set up through what's called a prime of prime, and then of course you have your retail FX platform, which is usually smaller size traders. So now prime of prime, the title is getting a bit abused now, where some dodgy retail FX platforms are trying to call themselves prime of prime to put themselves falsely into a different category, but that's the nature of humans and marketing. Now, so the aggregator will aggregate the prices. They will take best bid, best offer, and that's what gets delivered to the market. So the best bid, best offer is typically going to be the thinnest area of the market. And again, it's another subject matter that we are going to get into when we start looking at it in relation to charts. But that's the liquidity aggregator. Let's just pull over what we have happening over here. So this comes from an actual legitimate prime of prime who aggregates their own liquidity, and it's a very good liquidity. Right now we are in off hours, so the refresh rate is quite slow, and the spread is wider. So what happens is the top of the book here is going to be the thinnest pricing. Now you need to remember what I'm saying here, because I'm going to repeat it when I pull up the charts in a later session, but it's important to understand that the top of the book is going to be the thinnest pricing at best bid, best offer, because the depth has a ladder of varying volumes. So the ladder of varying volumes is when these prices start to get matched. That's what creates a lot of the short-term volatility. And there's another aspect that where the algorithms, once price starts to move, the algorithms and the banks change in order to protect themselves. They use like last look, and then they use another protective mechanism to prevent being clipped on counterparty transactions, but that's again another subject for another time. So what happens in this cascade is you have the retail FX platform, and they can come to an agreement with you. They can either offer you a fixed spread, or they can offer you, call it via ECN, and they can offer you the raw spreads and charge you a commission per trade, and then your commission gets reduced based on trading volume. Very similar to the model with Liquidity Aggregator, or if you're just an independent client of the bank, the more volume the trade, the lower your costs become. But what happens here is with every transaction between, for example, the retail platform and the Liquidity Aggregator, there's fees that need to get worked in between the aggregator and the investment banks. The fees need to be accounted for, and so therefore what happens is each independent retail platform will design algorithms that will lend to optimizing transaction volume and revenue. So there's many different ways so what happens is there's a lot of ways that this is done, and what a lot of these platforms will do is some of them will overstep boundaries, and then they'll get maybe tagged with a fine, and they've got to come back in within the boundaries. And so they're always testing the boundaries a little bit. In general, now that regulation has tightened up a little bit, we're starting to see much more refinement in the competition and the capabilities of the retail platforms to provide liquidity in a reasonably fair capacity to its customers. And there are some very, very good ones out there as well. So don't be discouraged. But with each step, so they'll design a price delivery mechanism that will typically serve their own best interests as well. They're trying to serve your best interests as well. So the Liquidity Aggregator, it's very similar. These are highly competitive. They're all pretty good, and they're all highly efficient, and they're fast, and their latency is very, very efficient as well. And the thing is, when you trade through Liquidity Aggregator or prime of prime, there are some contingencies concerning certain aspects that the market is still contending with, and one of them is last look. But the liquidity provided by these parties is really quite efficient and typically very reliable. It also depends largely on how you trade as well. If you're just a swing trader and your entry price and your exit price don't need to be cut with a razor, then even just being with an investment bank, trading spot through the investment bank is fine. Through one independent bank is fine enough. You don't necessarily need an aggregator if you're not looking for highly refined price delivery. So that's a little bit about how the framework functions. If you've just got a feed where you have access to the contributors to the feed, you can usually see the list constantly scrolling. You see the prices, and you can see the variance in the prices that are being offered by the contributors, and this is why you need the aggregators to pull in all of the prices and really give you the tightest spread that can be offered. Again, the aggregators will pull in all the prices on the banks, from the banks that they have within their network, and they pull in the prices. They've got effectively the ladder coming from the bulk of the banks, and they're offering you best bid, best offer. And again, best bid, best offer is going to be the thinnest point of liquidity, and we're going to show you what that looks like physically in a later session. The rates here can be delivered by streaming or by quote refresh, and when you're in a more active time, the prices are going to stream much faster, and the refresh of the rates is going to be at a high rate of frequency, and so that even alone can give you a sense as to what price is doing once you kind of get used to it after a while. So if you were to look at this today and see what it looks like today, this is obviously a very slow time in the market right now, but if you look at it now, if you look at it at London open, London lunchtime, London afternoon, New York opens, when pre-data, post-data, this is constantly changing in terms of its overall tempo, and you start to get a feel for it after a while. That actually just brings a little bit more of a feeling for overall market tempo at the time. And I'm not talking about scalping or short-term trading. It's just a matter of taking in another component of market structure. Okay, and so I don't want you to come to pre-conclusions as to what the subject matter is attempting to address. I'm not talking to scalpers. I'm not talking to intraday traders. I'm not talking to just swing traders or position traders. It's a matter of understanding the marketplace within which you're dealing, and the deeper you understand it, the more proficient you will be in finding your niche in the market. There's a few quirky things that can happen in the market. So liquidity, the price movement is a function of liquidity, and you're going to hear me say that day in and day out. Just as an example of just some of the short-term price movement, and we're going to talk a lot about the shorter-term price movement to build the foundation for your understanding for longer-term price movement. But you can have a situation where you have the client A dealing through the bank, and they're looking. They hit on a price, and they're looking to the bank is looking to offset that with a counterparty B. So the bank is getting their prices from the interbank feed, but they can deal this on their own. So for example, if the bank is a contributor to the interbank feed, and they on an occasion decide to deal at a price that is outside the streaming interbank feed, if as price is streaming on both sides, and you have your depth of liquidity, if the bank hits on a weak spot, on one of on the side of the counterparty, then it's going to need to find the liquidity. So it's going to have to run for liquidity. So often when you see price in a low liquidity state, and a deal goes through one of the banks within the interbank network, and it's looking for a price, and maybe it's a slightly larger order, and the larger order hits against a weak spot so if the demand side hits on a weak spot on the supply side, then you can start this price move, and so that's why you can often see price just jump from one price and just jumps up 5 pips or 10 pips, then comes right back, okay, or even jumps up 3 or 4 or 5 pips and comes back. And we're going to cover this in more detail as well, but that just gives you an example of some of the idiosyncrasies that go on within the deeper network of the interbank market. We did an enormous amount of study on this in the mid-2000s, and started and used it as a foundation to some of what we apply in our trading today. So I'm just going to leave you with that for today, and we'll see you in the next session.